seems like. I can't explain it in logical terms, except that I do know that police really want to solve their own cases. They don't want journalists and true crime writers to solve their biggest cases ever. So after the case is closed in '08, and I'm spending time with the new materials and doing all these interviews of people who had seen something and somebody at the mall at the time, and now I've got their names and I run them all down, and it's just fascinating. And I had made a phone call on the morning after that press conference to the county medical examiner's office, because now that file is going to be public record too. It's all this stuff has been closed, it's not been public record while the case was still actively investigated, which I would argue statutorily it wasn't. So I get no call back, and I was too busy doing some other stuff. So a year later, there was reason for me to call them back. So I call the clerks, the records person at the Broward County Medical Examiner. Says, I'd like to see the case file for the Adam Walsh file, please. It's missing. The biggest case file, the biggest case in the county's history, and you're saying that the case file is missing. Yeah. After the chief investigator died 2 years ago, we really don't know where it is. Oh, okay. So then I get a call back a week later. Oh, we found the file. Oh, good. May I come and see it? Yes, you may, anytime you'd like. So I come in the next day. And the chief medical examiner at the time was a famous guy on the Nancy Grace show, whose name is Dr. Josh Perper, allows me to see the case file. And then, an hour later, he took a meeting. An hour later, he comes in, asks questions, what's going on, what are you looking for? Dr. Perper, I can't find the autopsy report. So the one thing that a medical examiner's case file should have is the autopsy report. There is a cover sheet for it, which explains how the body came to the medical examiner's office, which was the afternoon after it was found in the canal. It had first gone to the medical examiner's office up in the county closest to where that had happened, but that was a small town place, and they didn't want to do the autopsy, and they had previous arrangements in such instances for the Broward medical examiner to do those autopsies. So with the proper paperwork and clearance, they helicoptered the head down, and it comes to Fort Lauderdale in the afternoon, and on the cover sheet it says it arrived. An autopsy was performed at 4 o'clock on that day, and it says who did the autopsy was the chief medical examiner, and then Dr. Perper, where's the rest of the report? The results of the report. The results of the external examination, the internal examination, the autopsy findings, and the signature by the doctor who performed the autopsy. And he looks and says, "It's not there." It says, this was before I got here," which is true. It was. But as the medical examiner, he was the custodian of records, so he is responsible for everything in all the records. And this autopsy report in the case file was not there. And then it wasn't, I came to realize it wasn't in the police file. It wasn't in the file of the medical examiner, upstate where that had first received the remains. Nor was it at the state attorney's office. Nobody had it. So I put that in the Miami Herald in a larger Sunday story on a front page that questioned whether it was maybe the killer of Adam was was Dahmer and not Toole, but they've got the sidebar of missing autopsy report. So that gets no particular rise from anybody. And I figured out a way to ask the chief medical examiner at the time whether he may have kept a copy. Because when I and the reporter from the Miami Herald I was working with, we had both separately called this man, he hung up on us. No, that wasn't very encouraging. Didn't speak more. The second time, the only quote we got, this is a reporter from the Miami Herald, and calling you to ask you about the Adam Walsh case, and the quote was, That's the full quote. nothing past that. Nothing more than that. Then he hung up. So I got him on the record through a public records request to the Broward medical examiner, because if he, on my request for the autopsy report, because it was missing from the file, the medical examiner was obliged to obtain it if he could. And I said, well, maybe the chief medical examiner did the autopsy. Maybe he's got a copy. Well, then he could get a copy that the current medical examiner, then current, could get it from the previous medical examiner, restore it to the file, and then give me a copy. Okay. So the original chief medical examiner emails him back and says, neither I nor anyone else in the office did a report on the head of Adam Walsh. No, it wasn't our case. He's the guy, statutorily, the guy who does the dissection, which is what was done in Broward, is the guy who writes the autopsy report, not the guy who does the exterior inspection, which was done in Indian River County, which is upstate. So, oh, okay, well that, and everyone I show this to says that makes no sense. So that's so apparently so. There was never any report written on the autopsy of Adam Walsh. Certainly wasn't written in Indian River County. And no one, again, the police and the state attorney, nobody seemed to care, even though the medical examiner who originally had seen the case in Indian River County was kind of miffed that he never got a copy of the report. So that's not there. But I'm able to put together between the remaining stuff that exists. Let me tell you what else doesn't exist in any of these files. There are autopsy photos that are always taken, and again, there's medical examiner guidelines that are published and now at least in the state of Florida, I'm sure they're uniform for everywhere else, and they say you need to have. You need to have photos. There are no photos. No photos of the actual autopsy are in the Broward Medical Examiner's file, in the case file of Adam Walsh. This was a dental identification only. Remember, there's no fingerprints there because it's only a head. There's no DNA because it's 1981. The head surprisingly didn't look as bad as you might expect from being gone for 2 full weeks and out in the Florida heat of July and August. It didn't look bad at all. After 3 days, it should have looked really, really, really awful, and it didn't. It was still, you could tell the skin color. There were certainly bad things on the remains, but you could still say, oh no, that's a white child. And it's like, oh, I was expecting a lot worse. That was odd for itself. They got the dental chart for Adam Walsh from his dentist, and the lieutenant of homicide was, for Hollywood PD, had brought it up to the Indian River medical examiner, and he's the one who did the positive ID from it. And there was a filling in Adam's records. Adam's chart showed a filling on the cheek side of his last lower left molar. So, and the child that was found had a similar filling in a similar spot. A lower left molar, and it was on the cheek side. So that plus, you might have thought that the Walshes would have been present at the Indian River morgue to make a visual ID, but that didn't happen. They sent a family friend because the Walshes were in New York that day. They were doing Good Morning America. They were called sometime before sunrise and told that a child's remains had been found. And then the show producer and later the show host, David Hartman, for anyone who remembers that, said, "We can get you on the first plane back to Florida." And John Walsh, speaking for himself and his wife, said, "No, we want to do the show. That could be denial or whatever else." But they ended up sending a family friend to go and do who said he had seen Adam like a day or a couple days before he disappeared. So there's no there's a mention that the family friend made a positive ID, a visual ID. That's there, but no statement or signature or anything like that. In John Walsh's book, Tears of Rage, published in 1997, he gives some small description and shows that the family friend on the first sight of the remains on the slab at the morgue did not actually recognize the child as Adam. It was only, he made the visual ID only after he asked the ME to lift the child's lips. And then he saw as Walsh writes, a small emerging tooth. And then he says, and then he knew. So the famous baseball picture of Adam, he's got a baseball bat and a red cap with a white C on it, and he's wearing his baseball uniform shirt is really for T-ball because that's what they played in age 6. And Adam's got a big smile, and it's really, really cute. And when you look closely, you can see that Adam has neither of his top front teeth. He's 6.5, and that's age appropriate. So the child that was found and identified positively as Adam has a tooth coming in on the top. A small emerging tooth. Now so there's two questions here. One is, when was the picture taken precisely? And I can answer that well, but not perfectly. And two, there was in the last seen alive description that is buried in the Hollywood police file, a really good one, where the police are describing Adam to another police department. He has a left top front tooth that is partially grown in. So his left tooth, according to that, has erupted. That's going to be his left front tooth, or in dental parlance, his top left central incisor. So now the question of how old is the picture. John Walsh wrote in his book that it had been taken a week before he disappeared. I found that it's maybe, you probably have to add 3 weeks to that. Maybe it's 4 weeks or something like that. Because it was a studio picture. So Walsh may have gotten the picture a week before, but the studio photographer told me that back then there were about 3 weeks of production time from shooting to delivery. So it's a month before. The police last seen alive description undoubtedly came from his mother. No, his left